Good morning, good morning. This is the 12th episode of FAFO and Chill, in which the Chainstack Developer Experience team talks about the various things we've been building and exploring within the Web3 space over the past few weeks. In classic Web3 fashion, we spend a lot of time exploring new Web3 technologies and building various tools. FAFO and Chill is where we talk about these things and dive into the world of Web3 tech. Today, in kind of similar fashion to the previous episode that we did, we're going to talk about some just general updates, new things in the industry, some different things we've been building, etc. Next week and some of the kind of coming episodes, we have a lot planned, specifically around bringing on some guests from potentially different protocols or social media protocols. Protocols meaning like blockchain, so we might have Avalanche or Scroll on, as well as some guys from Solarplex, as well as potentially Lens in the future. But for this week, what we want to do is talk about some of the recent things that have been happening over the past few weeks in specific. Today, actually, there was a big piece of news. We'll talk about it in a moment. But the Grayscale essentially had a court ruling that meant that the SEC has to review their Bitcoin ETF application. This is a big deal for a few reasons, but we'll get into it. We'll touch on it. Before we dive too deep into these different topics, first we can kind of go through some usual intros. Of course, typically we have three people here. Ake is not with us today, but as usual, we have kind of the two other hosts. Number one is me. My name is Ethan. My alias online is Tabasco. I am the developer relations lead here at Chainstack. Additionally, with me, I have David, our developer advocates lead. So what's up, David? How are you doing today?
Hey Ethan, all good. How are you? It's good to be here talking about this stuff again.
For sure. It's as usual, every week in crypto is like a month in Web 2 and kind of more traditional industries. So this week has been a little bit crazy, especially with some of the kind of emergence of social media, decentralized social media, social fi, I guess is the right word to say. I've seen a few different words for it. Social fi, which that kind of implies some sort of financial part to it, which sometimes is true. I mean, sometimes it isn't. Like, for example, with Lens or with Farcaster, it's not really like finance, right? It's just like Web3. So I prefer the term decentralized social media. And that's been, I think, beyond the initial news that I just mentioned regarding the Bitcoin ETF, and that's risen prices and stuff. I want to start by talking about what's basically been viral within Web3 over the past week or two, which has been a variety of kind of decentralized social protocols. So, of course, this was kind of initially kicked off by Friendtech. Friendtech went a little bit crazy after they launched, and everybody kind of flooded into it and went viral on crypto Twitter, and or I guess crypto X now, maybe that's the better way to say it. But it went crazy, got a lot of attention, and then the popularity of Friendtech eventually kind of reached into various other different decentralized social media applications. So then you saw Lens get more traction, you saw Farcaster. Farcaster over the past week has evolved an insane amount. I was actually just talking to Dan from Farcaster briefly in Twitter DMs, telling him like a month ago, Farcaster was a totally different environment, especially when it comes to the technical side of it, than it is today. So as usual, the rate at which everything is evolving is kind of crazy. So David, I guess maybe we can start with this. With all the things that have been happening within kind of the Web3 social media, decentralized social media space over the past week or two, is there anything in specific that you've seen that you're excited about that you think will kind of make it to the end of the sort of social media rat race in Web3? Of course, a lot of this was kicked off by Twitter switching to X and kind of some of the drama with that, which started a lot of focus on decentralized social media, right? Untethering it from central control into things like Farcaster and Lens. So is there one thing that's happened recently that you've seen or noticed that you're particularly excited for?
But honestly, I as I was saying before starting, like I'm really bad in keeping up with the new things and the trends. I actually was able to hop into the friend tech thing, kind of hype. I found some random code, some random invitation code there, and it worked. So I'm in. I honestly don't understand too much how this platform is working. It has a lot of hype, but I don't understand the UX much. It doesn't, I don't know, it's very weird. And apparently it's been already losing a little bit of traction, but a bunch of people bought and sold my shares. So I don't know what's the point. But um, yeah, I feel like between all of those, obviously Lens has been getting quite a bit of traction, and I think has been getting more attention lately, probably because of Friend Tech, as you mentioned. So that's interesting to see. They've been working on that for a long time, and I feel like it's not a bad idea how they do it. That they have this kind of ecosystem with a unique kind of profile, you could say, talking more in traditional social media terms. You can access many different platforms, and I kind of like that. I use Lenster, and I guess it's kind of like the Twitter equivalent of their ecosystem. I used it a little bit. It's an interesting concept. Um, I am definitely more interested and excited about Farcaster though. They're making a lot of progress. Like they're shipping like crazy you know, every couple of days. I'm like sending you a text. Hey, they ship this. We have to update our stuff. So yeah, I'm curious to see how that's gonna go. And we're early enough in that one too. So that one will be good.
Right. Yeah, I think with it's interesting the well, I guess to set some context, Farcaster and Lens are very different in a lot of ways. They're different in architecture. They're different in kind of the approach they take to being a Web3 based social protocol. I don't even know if they'd necessarily be considered direct competitors, maybe very slightly, but I think ultimately, like for example, the Lens ecosystem is really interesting, and I'm over there a decent amount because Lens is sort of like in a way a unified ecosystem of different applications. So if you post on Lenster, right, or if you post on, I think it's called LensTube, which is like the video
Let's
hosting
do, yeah.
part of Lens, or if you post on, I mean, whatever else, there's a million different like spin-offs of different Lens applications. What's cool is that all these things are sort of unified together, so that if I post on Lenster or LensTube, then let's say I post a short of FAFO and Chill on LensTube, and that also gets posted to Lenster, and vice versa depending on compatibility with different applications and stuff like that. So Lens as an ecosystem is very kind of coherent and continuous, which is really interesting, and I think it's a cool way of doing it because, for example, like within Web2, of course, if you want to post a video, right? Let's say we want to post a clip of FAFO and Chill. Then we do it on Twitter. You go to YouTube, you post it on YouTube. You go to whatever else you want to do, Reddit, stuff like that. Post a link, post the video itself, and you're spending all this time like just posting on these different platforms and trying to reach a different audience. But the approach that Lens takes to it is sort of acting as this protocol foundation of social media, where different types of social media can be built, right? So today we have Twitter and YouTube, for example. We have a video platform and we have like a text somewhat video platform. But I guess from my sort of brief experience with Lens, they look at that sort of landscape and that dynamic and they say, well, this doesn't work, right? Because we're kind of fragmented between different applications, stuff like that, to ultimately achieve the same thing, which is engaging with people, sharing content. So why don't we unify this under one foundation, right? The Lens protocol. Create a Lens profile, which is then shared across a variety of applications, whether it's video sharing like LensTube, or whether it's a more Twitter adjacent text space like Lenster, or whatever it may be, right? Ultimately, it's all shared together under one profile. You can cross post and post the same thing across multiple different places. I mean, this is a much more natural way, in my opinion, of interacting with social media and generating engagement, sharing content, than kind of the more traditional Web2 solutions, which I think is awesome. Now, Farcaster is actually a little bit similar in that Farcaster also acts as a sort of social foundation of various different applications. The most popular one and kind of the mainstream one is Warpcast, right? So within your Farcaster profile, you have some basic data that's shared throughout just kind of like the Farcaster ecosystem. And then Warpcast right now is kind of the main way of actually interacting with that data through like a user-friendly front end. So you can post. I don't think they have videos or any like additional multimedia just yet, but you can do text, images, stuff like that. And then that's shared through Farcaster. You can watch and query that programmatically. So if I make a post or if I update my bio, we can watch that through a Farcaster hub because I mean ultimately this is all Web3 based, and which means that the data and watching this data change and retrieving this data, it's all very accessible, which is great. And Farcaster considers themselves sufficiently decentralized, which of course is helpful too. And recently they moved to Optimism, which is cool. I think we can talk a little bit more about all this recently, or talk more about this in a moment. But what's been impressive with both these ecosystems is that number one, I think so. Right now, if you want to get into Lens, for example, you have two options, right? You can get an invite. So you could, I think it was you signed some message a while ago and then they gave you access to a Lens handle. It's like your name and then .lens. Um, you can buy a handle. I think it's like $100 or something. You can sometimes message Nader or, one of their team members and they'll give one to you. That's actually how I got my Lens handle. I just sent one of them a Twitter message and they gave me one. But right now the barrier to entry for Lens is pretty high because there is that need for an on-chain identity before you start engaging with Lens, and that on-chain identity has value associated to it, right? Which means that you either have to buy one that's existing, and it's not as simple as Twitter, for example. You just go and you type in your email and your username and you sign up and you start using it, right? So this is a barrier to entry for Lens, and it also was a barrier to entry to Farcaster because Farcaster was permissioned, right? I guess was the term that they like to use. Farcaster was permissioned in that the way that they did it was that it was invite only, very similar to Blue Sky, if anybody's familiar with that, where essentially they have this like initial group of users, a few of them get some invites, those invites go out to more people get more invites, and it just kind of spreads like that, right? Where people invite more people and so on. But ultimately, it's invite only. You need permission to join Farcaster and to create a profile. And this, for a while, was a big challenge because Farcaster was sort of an exclusive ecosystem. It still is. And that if you go in there, there's not a lot of people that have access to it. Most people don't have access to it. So what they did, their answer to this, and of course, huge shout out to the Farcaster team. These guys, I tell David this all the time in DMs, but these guys know how to ship. I mean, if there's one team that I could say that can ship quickly and that can fix things and kind of launch new things, it's the Farcaster team. It's crazy having, currently we're developing a bunch of stuff for Farcaster. Every day it's like they release something new and they make a big change or solve a big pain point or something. So those guys are awesome. But their answer to this accessibility issue of like, well, everybody needs an invite to join is that they actually, of course, number one, they moved to Optimism and they made all these like core technical changes in terms of the architecture of Farcaster itself. And then they made it permissionless. So I think this will go into effect in some X amount of time, a few weeks or something, where Farcaster, you won't need permission. You won't need an invite to use it, which is big. Anybody can build applications on it. Anybody can leverage the tech stack. Anybody can run a hub. You don't need permission to do any of this stuff, which previously, even something as simple as creating a Farcaster hub, which is a node basically, you needed to have permission to do that. You need to create a pull request on GitHub, basically reach out to the team, have them approve your ability to create a node. And of course, this is sort of antithetical to the ethos of Web3. I think they realize that, and they've shifted towards a far more Web3 focused and kind of philosophically aligned approach to making everything within Farcaster ultimately permissionless. So this is interesting, and I think Lens is still kind of on the border of that in terms of it's not quite permissioned in terms of accessing it, but you do need that initial identity, which isn't straightforward to get access to. It is as simple as that kind of. And then you have some additional solutions, which I actually think we'll be talking to next week, like Solarplex. I love the Solana ecosystem, and I love some of the things being built over there, including an application called Solarplex, which maybe we can talk more about that in a moment. But before we move on, David, on this topic of sort of Lens versus Farcaster, permissionless interaction, do you have any major thoughts on this in terms of, do you have a preference over, do you think the approach that Lens is taking right now in regards to having a sort of almost exclusive, NFT based identity. Is that the best way to do it? Do you prefer the direction that Farcaster is going in? What's kind of your general thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I have some overall kind of mixed feelings on it because the approach that they're taking is interesting. It's for sure useful to, grow up a little bit the hype and, spread the rumors around and stuff. Plus, we know the Web3 and crypto ecosystem, everything turns into a possible airdrop, so everyone gets crazy about all the new stuff, right? Uh, are they ever gonna have an airdrop for, users and the NFT holders? Who knows? But everyone likes to think so, so everyone gets super hyped about it. So I think they did a good job for that on leveraging this kind of hype. Um, and then I have mixed feeling because on one side, you want it to be open for everybody, that everybody can access and do whatever they like. The second part is if you open it for, if you're trying to give value, then you open it for everybody, then that's not as valuable anymore. So it really depends kind of how you want to see it, I guess. Um, I am generally very, I don't know, kind of, I want to define myself realist person. And I honestly don't know which one of those is gonna end up, being the more popular. Like I keep having the feeling that there are so many different things coming out, and people are not gonna use all of them. We can see it in the traditional, Web2 kind of space. Meta just released the Threads as competitor for X. What happened to Threads? Have you ever heard of anything? I signed up. I tried it. It's been there in the phone for a while, and I haven't looked into it in a long time. Um, so yeah, about the social media apps, I have always a little bit of mixed feelings because I keep having the feeling there are so many different things and people are not gonna use all of them, and so I guess the one that is gonna give the best experience is gonna get on top. Lens, I like how you were saying that they have, a really big ecosystem that works all at once. So I think that's a really big point of them, and it kind of returns on what we are used to in the Web2 environment. You have a Google account and you can access virtually any application from that account. So I like how they're going into that direction, and I think Farcaster is probably going to do something similar. Um, so I guess at the end of the day, whoever is gonna give more access, it's probably gonna win. Um, because again, I have the feeling that not everybody is going to use everything that comes out. But it's Web3 and crypto, so everything gets hyped a lot very quickly. So you never know. Um, yeah, it's kind of my take, I guess.
Right. I think, um, in general, what seems to be, well, sort of the way that I see a big part of Web3 right now is very adjacent to kind of the early part of Web 2, right? So,
Hmm.
what I mean by that is that there's a lot of products coming out. There's a lot of people trying to solve problems, a lot of people trying to compete with each other, lots of different social media protocols coming out. There's a million ideas being built in Web3, and nobody quite knows what to use. Nobody knows what's like the best strategy to use in terms of customer acquisition, user acquisition. So it's all just kind of like up in the air right now, like just figuring out what works. And then ultimately, as you also saw with kind of the Web2 tech ecosystem, that eventually products are consolidated and people realize what works best. People have a preference, like a universal preference, right? That's why Twitter has been like the champion of social media for however many years now, because eventually the best product comes out and people start using that. People get used to it, and that's what that kind of becomes the king of whatever vertical you're talking about. I think the same thing will happen with Web3 right now. Of course, we see a million products, a million different solutions to these kind of core problems. People trying to um, provide their different takes on it, which is great. And it means that because of this sort of like flurry of people kind of chiming in and starting their own thing and new products being built, eventually we'll kind of answer the question of what works best here, and what approach is the best one to take. Although, I have to say, I think that making anything like in Web3, I guess it depends on the goal, but in my opinion, ultimately the goal of Web3 is to onboard users and have people actually use your application. And I think if you say, well, the only way you can use my application is if you have, this sort of on-chain identity that is costs $100, right? Or whatever, right? I mean, this example can be universal across a bunch of applications. Or you need like this certain whatever, just name it and like attach a value to it. Any barrier to entry like this, you're blocking out 90% of the world, probably more than that, 95, 98% of the world in terms of actually using the application. Now, if that's your goal, then fine, right? That's the way to do it, I guess, if you want like a super exclusive community of people that are dedicated to it. But I think ultimately what will win in Web3 is whatever is most effective at capturing the highest number of people, right? Whether they're Web3 native or not. And I actually believe that, this idea of Web3 social media, of decentralized social media, ultimately, and I actually think Farcaster does a good job of this. Same thing with Solarplex. I think ultimately what needs to happen though is that it can't feel like you're using blockchain, especially with an application like social media.
Hmm.
This goes for everything. I mean, whether you're using any Web3 application that's not like something foundational like a DEX or something. Ultimately, if it feels like you're using Web3, if it feels like I have to sign a transaction every time I send a message, or I have to, you know, whatever, approve something if I want to update my profile, right? I mean, all of these things add friction that people don't want ultimately, right? So there's kind of been two solutions to this that I've seen. Farcaster is one of them, in that you don't need like on-chain interaction in terms of you don't need to sign transactions, approve different things, whatever, interact with your wallet basically. Sign off with your private key. You don't need to do any of this to interact with the protocol. Um, Lens is also moving in this direction. They essentially now require one main signature that you need to do, and then you have access to just kind of like unlimited automatic signatures. You don't need wallet pop-ups, whatever, which is great. Um, Solarplex and Solana takes the same approach, where you connect your wallet one time, and that's it, and it abstracts it away. It doesn't even feel like it doesn't feel like you're using a Web3 application. So, in my opinion, this is kind of the direction that we need to go into in terms of, we're competing with Web2. We're competing with Twitter. You're competing with Threads, all these things that are backed by millions of dollars, billions of dollars in some cases, of capital and years of research and like optimization on UX. So it's like, how do you even compete, right? When we're working with a less, a less built out tech stack, a more restrictive tech stack. Now, the benefits to this are clear in terms of why building a decentralized social protocol is beneficial. Of course, it means that you don't have a lot of the issues present with something like Twitter, where large changes and major, moderation issues and whatever it may be come up because of the existence of a central entity that can basically control the platform however they want, which means limiting, the ability to do whatever you want on Twitter, which means abiding by, essentially the exact guidelines that Twitter wants from you, right? So, for example, if I do too many hashtags in my posts, and maybe they'll deboost my Twitter thread, which is like, well, what's the point of that? Or if I talk about something that, talk about some sort of crypto concept or whatever, like that gets deboosted or I get shadow banned or whatever. I mean, the kind of list goes on of reasons why centralized social media is sometimes difficult for some people. Um, and this goes for every centralized application. I mean, all of them ultimately have these core issues of having to trust a centralized control to not restrict your access to something or limit your access to something or whatever it may be, right? So decentralized social media solves these fundamental problems, but at the same time, that's not enough for a lot of people. Most people don't care if maybe I get shadow banned, maybe I get terminated or whatever. I mean, that sucks, but most people, it's not a big issue. Um, but I think the user experience in these Web3 applications ultimately need to either be equivalent to or better than the Web2 applications. And I think Web2 social media, as a core, it'll be very unlikely to ever see any Web3 application that exceeds core UX. But I think you can leverage Web3 in a way that improves UX and enables something that isn't possible typically on Web2 social media. So let's use Solarplex as an example. I think they're doing a fantastic job of this, where with Solarplex, essentially the way that it works over there is that you connect your wallet one time. Everything else, you don't need to sign anything or whatever. Just, it happens on their website. And then, for example, if you want to react to a post, right? You actually react to posts on Solarplex, which is a Solana social media protocol. You react to posts with compressed NFTs. So all of your reactions are NFT based, at least, when you choose them to be. So you mint an NFT, you mint one of their NFTs, which they usually give you, and then you can react to something. When you react to it, that action is happening on chain, right? So you're minting the NFT, that's happening on chain. You can then use the NFT as a reaction. And I think it's stuff like this that's super interesting. And then, of course, also within Solarplex, you can tip people natively. So you can click on a button and basically send them whatever token you want. Like they have like 5 or 6 tokens now that you can send, which of course also happens directly on chain, initiates a transaction, sends it to their wallet. And this is all really cool. I mean, this is stuff that isn't it isn't like very practical within Web2 and isn't, it requires a lot of trust when you're dealing with stuff like that. So Web3 applications, I think, and David, it'd be interesting to hear if you agree or disagree on this, but I think the expectation that like at some point we'll have Web3 applications that as a foundation are easier to use or better to use than Web2 applications, specifically in social media, will be really, really difficult. I don't think we're ever going to get there. But I think the way that we see actual onboarding happening to these applications, to things like Farcaster and Lens and Solarplex, I think that will happen through the strategic usage of Web3 in the core UX to enable experiences, to enable functions that was either impossible or impractical on centralized Web2 technologies. But that's my take on it in terms of like kind of how that'll evolve. Do you agree, or do you have like a
Yeah, no,
specific idea in terms of
I
what
definitely,
needs to happen here?
yeah, no, I definitely agree that the statement that you had earlier said that, well, to really be able to onboard the masses, the application needs to feel like it's not using any kind of blockchain technology at all. That's kind of the secret there. If you start seeing wallets and signing transactions and messages, that's gonna scare away a lot of people. And funny enough, I saw some tweet today talking about account abstraction and was saying, well, you know, externally owned account right now is really just for kind of tech savvy people. It's difficult to use unless you're kind of tech person. And I'm thinking it is difficult to use even if you're a tech person. I mean, I am kind of a tech person, and I keep struggling with all sort of UX issues and like, uh, you know, uh, lack of confidence in this kind of things. So it's gonna be difficult for regular people to go into it. And I feel like yeah, Lens and Farcaster, and I don't have experience with Solarplex, but I feel like they're going in the right direction. I can get behind one interaction with the wallet, and then that's it. They're doing Lens, for example, on at least on the Lancer side. I don't have much experience beside the Lancer part, but they do something very similar to what you were describing with, for example, following and followers. That whenever you follow someone or someone follows you, then that kind of mints an NFT that is recorded on chain. So that is a interesting concept. But yeah, I feel like if we're gonna have enough advancement in the account abstraction tools that starting to come out, that's probably gonna allow to have better kind of UX and onboarding. One thing that comes to mind that we were actually talking about it a couple of days ago, which has nothing to do with social media, but for example, the Brazilian bank that I'm using started a kind of reward program, some sort of like cashback type of thing, where every amount that you spend, like I'm in Brazil, so every Brazilian real that you spend gives you back 0.01 of this reward. And interesting enough, it doesn't say about, I mean, you don't see that type of reward works on the blockchain unless you actually go to the end of the page and see powered by Polygon. When they launched this thing a couple months ago, and I was like, oh wow, this is really, blockchain. It smells like blockchain quite a lot. It's on my bank app, which of course is the app, and the bank itself is centralized, obviously. But it gives you this kind of like reward depending on actions that you take. You can stake these rewards. They call it freezing, but it's basically staking. And I was like, for more reward, you stake it for more rewards, and like they do draft for like lotteries and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, this smells like a lot like blockchain. They probably just do it in their background. It looks like it's a blockchain type of thing, but they probably just do it as a regular thing. And then one day I just scrolled down to the bottom of the sections, like powered by polygons, like, oh, then it is an actual blockchain type of thing. And I had no idea until I actually saw the Polygon logo. So it's obviously I'm in the environment, so I was kind of smelling it. But that's the kind of experience that you need to have in this kind of application. And obviously the bank has nothing to do with social media, but once you can get to the level, then you know that that's good enough to be able to onboard quote unquote regular people. So I'm really curious to see how account abstraction is going to evolve. Hopefully, that's going to be, it's not going to be a silver bullet for sure, because especially on the developer side, it's going to be still quite of a struggle to come up with good processes for that. But I think we're going in the right direction. Or unless you start using chains that are already supported natively, for example, ZK Sync, they have account abstraction built in. I think that was a pretty good move, because even though now Ethereum has the EIP 4337, that still has its limitation. You still need to have EOAs here and there, and Ethereum wasn't built with the idea of account abstraction in mind. So everything that you're going to do, it's still going to need some workaround and some stuff. But we're going in the right direction, I think, for that.
Yeah, I think what's been really exciting to see is that, of course we're deep in the bear market, but that doesn't mean that um like innovation in Web3 isn't happening. And I think it's actually been happening a ton over the past like 6 months, more than it was. I mean, I've been doing Web3 every day full time for the past, almost 2 years now in total. Um, 3 years if you count some part-time stuff. And I think like really the past 6 months have been one of the kind of most critical times in terms of actual new and impactful innovations happening. For example, account abstraction, that becoming sort of like a mainstream technology. By mainstream, I mean things that's actually usable. It's not just like concept, right? Being actually implemented in different applications. That's been huge. You have Economy, StackUp, a million different organizations now that are enabling account abstraction. And you have things like MPC, so multi-party computation for wallets and different like ways of seedless interaction, and all these new social protocols coming out now, and these major upgrades happening to Ethereum, for example. Like they have this one, I forget the name of the upgrade, but it's happening soon. It's going to like reduce like I think it was reduce gas fees and these different things. We might have actually talked about it briefly on one of our previous episodes, but it essentially like supports layer two scaling and stuff like that. And I mean, ultimately, recently over the past 6 months, there have been a ton of pushes towards things that fundamentally improve user experience in Web3. And actually, a few days ago, I was asked by, this might have been on Thursday or Friday, but I was asked to basically give a comment on a question for an article. And the question was something like, is decentralization a marketing buzzword? Is it a myth? Is it, like, do people just say it? Is it actually, does it actually exist in like a significant capacity in Web3? I was like, well, of course it does. It's the technology itself is built on decentralization. But I think ultimately people have an idea, and we've mentioned this briefly before, but I think people typically have an idea of like something is either, and if you ask kind of the like very highly technical community, you'll see a lot of polarizing opinions on this, where it's something is either completely decentralized, 100% decentralized, or something is 100% decentralized. There is no middle ground. And I think ultimately what will actually turn into good applications will be something that stops thinking about like, you know, centralization and decentralization as just like a binary, and thinking about it like, oh, I need to, they're spending all their engineering time just trying to make it as decentralized as possible or whatever. And I think the applications that will be most successful are things that don't focus on like those tech concepts that aren't as important to people, and instead focus on using Web3 in a way that adds something on top of what's already possible within Web2, right? So if all of our application focus is on like just creating something as decentralized and as just totally trustless, self-custodial as possible, then we're gonna just like in my opinion, the amount of time that it'll take for us to actually create anything meaningful will be significant. Versus if we settle for something that maybe exists in between centralization, decentralization. Some components of it are totally decentralized. Some are maybe on the more centralized side. If we settle for that, and like as an ecosystem, we're okay with the concept of having something that's somewhere on the middle ground, right? That optimizes not for decentralization or centralization, but instead optimizes for user experience and leveraging decentralization for improving that user experience. But that only happens up to a point, right? Decentralization, in my opinion, especially for consumer facing applications like social media, has diminishing returns. So, up to a certain point, as soon as you start trying to max out decentralization and make everything rely on your own everything, right? Just like running everything yourself and trying to distribute everything, then eventually you kill user experience and you make it harder to use it. You make it less accessible, and finding some middle ground that instead creates the best UX possible while reaping the benefits of blockchain fundamentally, like the sort of philosophical benefits and the trustlessness and the permissionlessness and being able to kind of own on-chain assets and uh, tokenize in real life assets, stuff like that, whatever it may be, actually own things. All these different concepts ultimately can still be enabled without going totally 100% to the right of the spectrum in terms of decentralization. And you still get the core benefits of blockchain. And I think, we're seeing this a lot with some of the kind of newer age applications where, in my opinion, I think right now, like the best utilization of blockchain, they're using account abstraction, they're using some sort of like, wallet technology that makes it easier to onboard. They're using, whatever maybe. There's a million different solutions now. But yeah, they're using something that isn't like as kind of fundamental as MetaMask. They're leveraging a kind of abstraction some way. They are optimizing for user experience. And there's some applications like this, like I think Farcaster is a pretty decent example of somebody that does this right, as well as SolarPlex does a lot of this right as well. And I think these are the solutions that ultimately will become these sort of mainstream focused applications like we talk about today. But I don't know, David, do you agree with that sort of diagnosis of the constant battle between what represents the best of Web3 in terms of like philosophy, right? So decentralization all the way, or do you think that creating applications that exist somewhere in between that instead optimize for user experience is more beneficial? I know it's sort of like a sometimes a very opinionated, polarizing topic within the community in terms of where we should be within that collectively. But what are your general thoughts on this as it relates to things like social media?
Yeah, well, I also have mixed feelings. I have mixed feelings about all the things. Now that I think about it, decentralization is one of those things. For example, it is kind of the core principle of Web3, blockchain, and everything. But I feel like a balance is kind of needed everywhere. I think Farcaster does a good job with that. I like how they describe themselves as a sufficiently decentralized platform. I really like that point. You want the decentralization, obviously, on the kind of like democratic side, access for everybody, fairness for everybody, which is what we need. But at the same time, you kind of need some trusted organization that can get in and solve problems when something is needed. And I feel like Chainstack itself is a pretty good example of this. Obviously, we operate uh, decentralized technologies. We offer, infrastructure, blockchain infrastructure for various decentralized technologies, but we are obviously a centralized entity. Our infrastructure itself is distributed. We don't have one point of failure since we offer, the service from so many different locations, so many different providers, and so on. But at the same time, you also need that central point that you can go complain to if something goes wrong or you need something fixed. Because yeah, we could decentralize the infrastructure completely. I believe there is some other provider that's trying to do that. Oh yeah, let's completely decentralize the infrastructure. But then what happens when something goes wrong? And we know that things go wrong in running blockchain nodes. So who takes care of that? So you want to have that, you know, be sufficiently decentralized so that you have fairness, that you have data security and everything, but at the same time, you still need somewhere to go when, something needs to be fixed. So I guess that's kind of my idea on that. That 100% decentralization, I think it is a nice idea. It has a nice idea. It sounds good, but at the same time, I don't know how feasible it is to have everything 100% decentralized. Yeah, this is for
Yeah.
sure gonna be controversial for some people. I'm curious to see what you think about this specific topic.
Yeah, I think, for me, decentralization is important, but I think it's only important up to a point in which it provides benefits. I think there is a point where it no longer provides tangible benefits and it only creates like unnecessary complexity, right? It's just like the same idea that goes into creating any application as a developer. When you create something, there is always a balance of figuring out what meets your needs, what creates functionality without overcomplicating it. Because as soon as you overcomplicate it, sometimes you can make things harder to use. If something goes wrong, then it can be difficult to diagnose and difficult to solve. So, I mean, just purely from the perspective from a developer, in my opinion, I think, is that everything, like you said, needs to be balanced for what creates the best application. Sometimes maybe that's complete decentralization. You're not relying on any centralized RPC provider. You're like running your own nodes, or you're using some sort of decentralized provider or something like that. Your application is hosted entirely with decentralized storage on IPFS and storage and all this stuff, and um, your entire application is dictated by like governance tokens or whatever, right? I mean, like you go fully to the max, and but the issue with that is that at a point you are now sacrificing user experience for something that most people don't care about, which is decentralization. I mean, and it's an unfortunate reality that like the average person probably can't even define what decentralization is, let alone actually care about it. What they do care about, though, is the point where decentralization provides tangible benefits to the experience that they have on an application. And it's true, it does provide tangible benefits um, when there's not too much of it, if that makes sense, right? It's like I hate to use like a juvenile analogy here, but it's like when you're putting salt on your food, right? There's a point in which it's like good, right? And like it like actually adds to the meal, but if you put too much on it, then it's like it tastes terrible, right? And it's
That is
it's
a good
not
point.
not ideal. It's kind of a silly analogy, but I mean ultimately that's like exactly what's happening here in terms of if you overdo it and try to go the full like Satoshi route of being completely aligned with decentralization, and you want zero centralization present in your application, you can do that. It's not impossible to do. The tools are there and the resources are there. You can figure it out. But ultimately, the issue is that you're removing an access point for most people. Most people won't want to use your application if it's hard to use because of too much of a focus on decentralization and sort of embodying the Web3 philosophy, which is a philosophy that I agree with, of course. Um, but again, we're here trying to create a technology that actually serves people. And on that point, I think that what I'm very excited about, and what like I mentioned, I've been very excited to see, is that for a long time, I think especially in 2022, it was kind of hard to see like what was happening in blockchain. In terms of it was like, well, what we just like 2022 was a year in which we basically came out of the sort of bull market, but people started leaving and innovation slowed down, and everything became difficult, and it became hard to see what was being built, like who's actually still building things, right? And it was like felt kind of barren almost. And a big part of 2023 was also like this, but I think specifically recently, what we've been seeing, and including with the news that I mentioned at the beginning of our episode today, I think we've been seeing, like, I hate to say light at the end of the tunnel, but I think ultimately that's what we're getting close to in terms of we're getting to a point where the space doesn't feel as much of like a, you know, is anybody still left? Is anybody still here? Right? It's more of like a, well, you can actually see what's being built. There are actual things being built, and these are tangible things, and there's real improvements being made to fundamentally how Web3 works and how you interact with Web3. And beyond this, in the real world, maybe is the right term to use, or outside of like the blockchain ecosystem, crypto Twitter, stuff like this, there are actual changes being made that make it easier to integrate to integrate blockchain applications, and to bring blockchain specifically as a financial instrument to people. For example, like I mentioned with the grayscale Bitcoin ETF ruling. This was today. I believe a federal appeals court ruled that the grayscale Bitcoin ETF application had to be reviewed by the SEC. Now, this doesn't mean that it's approved, doesn't mean that there's anything like tangible or significant here, but it means that there's a step in the right direction in terms of the SEC will review the application, and we're getting to kind of sort of a critical point in, I guess, Web3 usually includes Bitcoin in some case. Some people will tell you that it doesn't. But I think Bitcoin, it just represents blockchain and kind of represents the ecosystem in a lot of ways. So when we look at something like a Bitcoin ETF, that if that's successful, it's not a success for Bitcoin. It's a success for the entire ecosystem, which is kind of what we saw today, right? We saw kind of a rallying in prices, and while that isn't super indicative of like actual change, I think it has been cool to see the positive response and kind of the reinvigoration of the blockchain community that's happened as a result of some of these kind of like small wins, especially within the legal system in the U.S. That have happened recently as a kind of a pullback from that unfortunate initial strike from the SEC with Coinbase and with Binance US, stuff like that earlier this year. So I think, in my opinion, we're getting to a point now where, as a builder, and I say this constantly, but I truly believe it, and I take my own advice in this case, and I'm constantly building things. As an organization, we're constantly building things because, in my opinion, we aren't that far away from getting to a point where, we're explaining to people what Bitcoin is or what blockchain is again, right? Where it's like that's what it was in 2021 or whatever, like in the last cycle, where it was like everybody was talking about it. Everybody at least knew, fundamentally, that like this is something's happening with blockchain. Um, I think we've moved away from that, but I think, for me, I'm not very involved in like the markets and that side of it, like the prices and the trading. I more so care about the actual changes that are happening on a technological level in Web3. And I think we're getting to a point in which these are happening very quickly. And I think as we start to move past legal barriers, as we kind of move forward in that sense, and as some of these newer solutions that have been created over the past few weeks and few months start to be implemented and used, and we start to see these sort of next generation Web3 applications come out, like Farcaster is, I would classify it as a very kind of an application that looks forward, and that utilizes Web3 in a way that makes sense. I think Solarplex and Lens in a lot of cases also represent this sort of new type of Web3 application. I mean, if you just look at a year ago, I remember when I first got into Web3, it was, oh, you install MetaMask, you go find the RPC, go find the chain ID, go import it all into MetaMask and sign a transaction. And like the dApps that you have access to, I don't know, you have access to Uniswap, right? Like a DEX, or you can go use, back when I first joined it was DeFi Kingdoms was a big thing, which was an interesting like game. It was basically just a DeFi application. And you go in there and you like maybe play DeFi Kingdoms or whatever. I mean, like today you have fully fledged social media platforms that are decentralized and that are conducted on chain, and that leverage blockchain technology, that leverage Web3 to create something that's actually usable, which, from my perspective, really wasn't possible up until recently. So this is, in my opinion, very exciting. I think we're getting to kind of like just a critical point in Web3 in terms of moving forward towards something that is actually real in the span of kind of the tech ecosystem. But I guess, to kind of serve that as a conclusion, or leading into that, David, what are your thoughts on this in general in terms of where we're currently at within Web3 on the side of usable applications of user experience, specifically with some of the kind of recent innovations that have been happening? I think decentralized social media is a perfect example of this. But what are your opinions on kind of where we're at and where we're headed in the short term?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree pretty much with what you were saying that little by little we are improving. We are getting in the right direction. I see bigger applications like you mentioned, Uniswap. Uniswap is starting also to include this kind of UX features that go a little bit in the direction of making a user more user friendly. For example, um, I saw not too long ago that you can. This is probably an old feature, but it's something that I discovered not too long ago because, kind of like you, I don't follow the market side too much. But for example, in Uniswap, and I'm sure there are many other decentralized exchanges that do that, but you can get Ethereum or whatever other cryptocurrency directly from your credit card, from the Uniswap UI. You go in there, say, "Oh, I want to buy this much Ethereum." You can do it directly from a card instead of having to do the whole thing, go through a centralized exchange, and then send some funds to your wallet and that all the thing. So I think these little things are going to keep improving, and all this. There was a pretty good point you made that yeah we have this application like decentralized social medias that are full blown applications that leverage pretty much 100% of the Web3 technology that are usable today. I think we need more of those. And something that I'm honestly still a little surprised about is that we don't have more games that are really purely Web3 based that are very successful and that are very known because to me that's kind of the obvious next step. Like, yeah, you wanna, the famous sayings are we wanna onboard the next billion users. I feel like the easiest way is gonna be through video games, and many mainstream video games in Web2 fashion, they already they always been working with a very Web3 oriented idea, for example, where you buy, where you acquire, playable things or skins or certain parts of games that are unlocked through, I don't know, quest missions or even buying them. That to me is kind of the logical step. Like, what better technology than a blockchain will be there to work with these things. And right now it's obviously not like that. If you buy some skin or object, whatever in a game, it's not yours. They can remove it from you anytime, no refunds. Thank you, bye. You know. So to me, video games is gonna be it is the obvious next step, and obviously is the easier way, or the easiest way to onboard people. And I'm honestly surprised that there isn't something big yet. Or maybe the reason I'm completely out of it. But I think I would have heard that there was something, of the caliber of a AAA game that was actually leveraging Web3, like it's supposed to do. So I feel like games is kind of the obvious next step that is going to, and I'm kind of surprised that we're not there yet. Honestly, I don't know what the blockers are. There are many smarter than me people working on stuff like this, so there is for sure some big blocker there. But um, that's kind of what I feel like there.
I think in terms of gaming, it's a good point. I think for a long time we didn't have the tools to create games that felt untethered from Web3. Like like we talked about, if a game, for example, I mean, there's no reason for anybody to make a Web3 game if, I mean, even today, most of it is still only in the browser. Well, why is it only in the browser? It's because you use MetaMask to sign transactions and to connect to it. This is this kills any sort of real game that wants to build because no AAA game is going to create a browser-based application that interfaces with MetaMask to buy skins or whatever. Right now, the core functionality is there in terms of like, yeah, you can represent in-game assets on chain and you can truly own these things and trade them on like marketplaces and peer to peer with other players, stuff like this, which is awesome. And you can implement this in games. The issue though is the access point, in my opinion. Because up until recently, you had to build games on a browser because of the wallet, right? Now, I think today you have more options. You can do it on on an actual application, which opens up the possibilities. Like for example, I'm talking to a project called Lumius or Lumius, however you pronounce it. They're actually using Chainstack. They're going to do
Nice.
an announcement about it, I think on Saturday, Sunday. But these guys are building a Web3 game that is actually an application. So it's not a browser. It's not like a web app. It's like like a executable file through a launcher that they have, which is cool. And then I think we see more of these popping up now where the tooling is just now, just like today, basically, and over the next few months, is getting to a point where like creating Web3 applications that don't feel extremely tethered to Web3, specifically games, is becoming possible. So, like, I think we were actually just talking about this a few days ago, but there's an example. I believe it was in the documentation for StackUp. Am I correct on that, David?
Yeah, I think so.
So there was a game in the documentation of some
Mm.
account abstraction provider. I think StackUp was the one that we were looking at.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's them.
And it was a web app, but essentially you could go in there and without connecting a wallet or any like significant, you know, blocker to access, right? You could get into the game and execute on-chain actions without signing any transaction, without connecting like a wallet, without doing anything that like felt like it was Web3. You just played the game, you just did it, right? And it was all handled in the back end, and it was all on chain, but you didn't know that it was on chain. There was no like, and there wasn't no obvious way that it was on chain. This is super cool, right? This is, I think, what we need. And applications that are games in specific that leverage blockchain, I think we'll see a lot of them that aren't built around blockchain as a central topic, right? So, like, of course, we have a lot of games today that they have Web3 or DeFi or whatever in the name, right? And these are cool. And I'm sure they're, I played a few of them and a lot of them are great, but they are very tethered to Web3. In my opinion, I think what we'll see is we already have large game studios that are invested in Web3, Ubisoft, for example. And I think what we'll see is that as the tooling gets to a point in which it's possible to create applications, to create games that are actually usable and don't feel like they're tethered to Web3, is when you'll start to see AAA games and real games start to leverage Web3 in the back end potentially, right? Where it's not obvious that you're interacting with the blockchain, but you still are. And then you're hitting the exact point that we just talked about, which is you're integrating a centralized experience, a game, for example, with decentralized technology, right? On-chain interaction, on-chain asset ownership, um, and creating this middle ground of a game that is decentralized in potentially the way that it owns assets, right? Or whatever it may be, right? Or the way that it interacts with X and Y, right? But it's also centralized fundamentally because it runs on servers or it's owned by a specific company and it's whatever, right? But at the end of the day, you now have something that's, kind of centralized into a combination between both technologies, right, Web 2 and Web 3. And you have an experience that doesn't feel too much like Web 3, doesn't feel too much like Web 2, and reaps the benefits of both. And now you have something that I think actually people use and nobody actually knows that they're using Web 3, but they actually have the kind of ownership attached with Web 3 or whatever they're using Web 3 for. So I think that the gaming is a perfect example. Social media and kind of these very, very user focused applications. I think that what we'll see is eventually the goal, I think, is that in 2 years' time, you know, one out of every four apps that you use or games or that you play or whatever leverage blockchain somewhere, right? And you don't know it. You have no idea that they leverage blockchain, but they do somewhere, and they do it in a way that enhances the experience of the application, and makes it just like makes it more fun or makes it more usable or whatever, right? Maybe we'll see some like I think Farcaster, Lens, Solarplex. These are all awesome applications that have the potential to onboard people and actually be used that have maybe a more Web3 centric focus. But anyways, I'm very excited for the possibilities of where the ecosystem in general is headed, especially when it comes to user focused applications. And as always, the potential for creating these things, right? I mean, none of these things that we just talked about in terms of applications that leverage Web3 in this way, they don't really exist yet. It's all tech demos and concepts, right?
Hmm.
Like the game that we talked about from the stock up documentation. It's just a tech demo. It's not really a game. It's just like a here's what's possible. So it's like as a developer, the opportunity is incredible. It's like outstanding almost in terms of you're right now standing behind, like just this massive, vast potential with so many different types of applications. Whether you want to create a game, whether you want to do something with social media, whether you want to do something with wallets, maybe solve some of the kind of fundamental wallet UX problems. Maybe you want to create financial applications or integrate with banks like Dave was talking about or whatever, right? I mean, the number of applications that can be built that haven't been built yet or haven't been built in a significant capacity is incredible, and it's just waiting on somebody to build it. Now that being said, of course, if anybody is still listening to the podcast and you're a developer, um, then definitely, depending on whatever you're building, or if you want to build something of this nature, then of course at Chainstack we're very happy to help you out. Um, if you're building something that we talked about today, DM me at Tabasco Web3 on Twitter. I'd love to hear about it and chat. But of course, also we do foundational infrastructure for, I believe it's over 26 different blockchains now.
Lost
So we're
count.
we're getting up there in terms of just like it's like every month we integrate something new or multiple new chains. Actually, today we just announced a public Kava endpoint. So we're always pushing forward, trying to essentially reach the center of what we talked about today in terms of enabling developers to realize the potential of Web3 without having to wrestle with the core points of connectivity with Web3 that typically can be a pain point for people. So you can always go to chainstack.com, launch RPC nodes, subgraphs, data APIs, etc. Kind of leverage these kind of core infrastructure components across 26, maybe even 27 at this point, different blockchains. And if you're building something cool that relates to anything that we talked about today, message me on Twitter. I'd love to hear about it. It's always super interesting to kind of hear about what people are building and the ideas that people have. But I think this kind of brings us to the end of the conversation today. David, did you have anything else that you wanted to touch on here, or any final thoughts in regards to any of the multiple different topics that we touched on today?
No, I think we faffled. We faffled enough for today.
We did lots of FAFO today, and lots more FAFO coming soon over the next few weeks. Definitely watch out for. Of course, this will be posted on Friday, but over the next week or 2 weeks, we have a lot in the pipeline in terms of FAFO and Chill, and in terms of not only FAFO and Chill as a podcast, but we're FAFOing on a lot of other things as well, including Farcaster and some of the other things that we talked about today. So as a developer, keep an eye out on Chainstack and some of the things that we're releasing. Of course, you can catch FAFO and Chill every Friday at the Chainstack YouTube channel or on Spotify. And then, of course, in addition to this, you can follow us at Chainstack HQ to watch kind of the announcements and some of the things that we're releasing within the developer experience team. The next few weeks will be very exciting, and specifically look out for things like faucet releases and different tools that we're releasing and things related to social media, stuff like that. Lots of exciting things happening, and lots to look forward to. So definitely, David, thank you for having me on today. Super interesting discussion as always, and
Thank
thank you
you,
everybody
Ethan.
for tuning in.